going to quickly go over Chapter 8. You'll notice that this is a shorter version than the one posted in your lessons, but this is just the basics, and make sure you check out the PowerPoint in your lessons folder as well, because it dives into the topics a little bit deeper, and then it gives you a few more pictures that might help explain some of these concepts too. So our objectives are to differentiate between the CNS and PNS. We'll talk about the types of nerve tissue, the different cell types, what exactly a membrane potential is, the synapse, which is the space between those cells that we'll learn about, and then the last part is what is a neurotransmitter and receptor. Alright, so first of all, the CNS is the central nervous system. That just contains the main brain and spinal cord. The PNS is peripheral nervous system, is everything else. So all the nerves that go out into your organs, your limbs, your toes and your fingers, that's all peripheral nervous system. We can divide the PNS into two different categories. One is the sensory division, so that's sensing things from the outside world, and the motor division, which is your brain telling your body how to respond to those senses. So from the very beginning, the cell of the nervous system is called a neuron. It's very specialized. It has three main parts: the cell body, the dendrites, and the axon. And then, let's take a look at the picture here. We have the cell body. The dendrites are the little yellow guys sticking out in this direction. And then we have one long axon, and you'll see that the axon is covered with this blue stuff. And that blue stuff is actually just an insulating material, and it's called the myelin sheath. That will become important when we talk about the nerve impulses. So between each of those cells we have a space, and it's called the synapse, or nerve synapse. Between the cells we have little neurotransmitters that are sending messages from one to the next one. They move by going through the synaptic cleft, or this space. Some examples are acetylcholine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. Those are some that you've probably heard of, or at least read about in your book. I would definitely make sure you take a look at this in your book, or find a video that shows a good example of how a synapse works, because it's just something, it's a little bit more visual. You might need to see it a couple times for it to make sense. Alright, we can classify neurons by sensory or motor, and then we also have this third term, it's an interneuron, and that's really just the piece that connects sensory to motor, or motory to sensor. Sensory. Alright, neuroglia. These are the 6 different types of nerve cells. Let's look at them one by one. The first one is an astrocyte. So this entire gray tan area is the astrocyte. You can see that it has the cell body right here, and then the little branches that are branching out to the blood vessels around it. And that's important because it helps to regulate the exchange between the neurons and those capillaries. The second one is a microglia, and it is responsible for monitoring the health of the cells and then performing defense. So they're kind of like, if you want to think about it this way, they're kind of the white blood cells of the nerve cells. The next one is the ependymal cells. You'll find these lining all kinds of cavities. So in your brain there's lots of fluid, and we need these little fingers that are pointed off of the ependymal cells to help move that fluid and keep it flowing in the right direction. Right. Next one up is called an oligodendrocyte, and if you've noticed, this is a familiar term, myelin sheath. The oligodendrocytes are what's wrapping around those axons that help protect it and provide insulation. So those first 4 were all part of the central nervous system. The next 2 that we'll go over are part of the peripheral nervous system, and this is what they look like. The satellite cells are these purple guys up here. We're not exactly sure what they do at this point, but they do exist. And then again, of course, we see more of the myelin sheath here. But in this case, since we're talking about the peripheral nervous system, those are called Schwann cells. Alright, so wrapping up the central nervous system. We know that it contains the brain and the spinal cord, and we want to find a little bit more about each of those. The brain is made of 3 regions, the cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem. And there's 2 types of tissue that make up those 3 regions, either gray or white. The gray tissue is mostly cell bodies because it's more dense and it looks like a darker color. And the white part is mostly axons because that insulation is kind of like a fatty material. And if you've ever dissected anything, you know that fat usually looks white or like a light yellow. So that's why we call it the white matter. In a brainstem, you can see that some of the dark matter is towards the center and white matter on the outside. And then as we get down into the spinal cord, you'll see this almost kind of an H shape that's all made up of the gray matter, and the outer part is all white matter. This will make more sense as we get towards the end of those slides. Alright, so we have 2 cerebral hemispheres. Remember, the cerebrum is the top big part of your brain, and is characterized by gyri and sulci. So those are kind of the mountains and valleys, or the dips and grooves of your brain. There's 1 longitudinal fissure down the middle, and let's take a look at that. Here's the longitudinal fissure that separates the right from the left, and there's other fissures too, but really that one stands out quite a bit. And if we take a look at the lateral side, you'll see the cerebrum is really quite big compared to this smaller cerebellum at the bottom. And then also you can see at the beginning of the brainstem right through here, which is going to travel into what will become the spinal cord. Okay. Alright, a little bit about the brainstem. The brainstem is made up of 3 parts, the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is especially important because it controls those things that are vital to your life that you really don't have voluntary control over. So your cardiac rate and your respiratory rate, that all happens inside your brainstem. And if we look at a picture here, you can see that there is the pons, the medulla oblongata, and the midbrain, all in this green color. Make sure you can point those out. And lastly, the cerebellum. It's mostly important for coordination and balance. You will also find that there are 3 lobes within the cerebellum. We don't need to really go into that too much more. As long as you know the cerebellum is really about balance, then you're good to go. If you blow it up a little more, it looks kind of like this. 3 lobes, and it sits right behind the brainstem. So we have this big important brain. We got to protect it somehow. There's 3 layers of what are called meninges, and if you've ever heard of meningitis, this is what's affected with that disease. So it's an inflammation of the meninges, and it's just 3 layers that wrap around the entire brain and the entire spinal cord. Its job is to protect, but also keep the cerebrospinal fluid in. We call that the CSF. So let's take a look here. We have the skin of your scalp up here, and then you'll notice that there's your skull. Underneath your skull, we have these 3 layers of dura mater, arachnoid matter, and pia mater. That's your meninges, and it's keeping all of this fluid that's right in here inside your brain. You need that to stay hydrated. Alright, last thing about brain, things that can go wrong. So we have trauma, cerebrovascular accidents, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Huntington's. These are pretty common diseases of the brain, so make sure you take a look at these on your own. Go ahead and pause the video and look them up if you need to. But continuing on, we have the spinal cord, which extends from the foramen magnum, which is the very base of your skull, all the way down to the 1st or 2nd lumbar. That's all the way down to your low back. And there's 31 pairs of spinal nerves that are going to branch off to both the right and the left side. And this is what that looks like. So each of these little yellow pieces on the side is a spinal nerve that's branching off between your vertebrae. This is what it looks like in a real human. You can see right here there's a spinal nerve branching off on the right and the left, and the whole thing right here, it's actually quite large, is the spinal cord. Alright, we have dorsal horns and ventral horns. Think of this as being a front and a back. So we have dorsal meaning the posterior or back side, ventral meaning the anterior or front side, and one of those is going to send messages up to your brain and one is going to carry them down. So let's go ahead and look at this. The dorsal side carries the afferent fibers. So that means this side right here is carrying things up to your brain. And the ventral side, the front side down here, is going to be carrying things from your brain down to your muscles and to your organs. It's another way to look at it. This can be kind of a tough concept, so if you're having trouble with this one, keep your eyes posted for another video later this week. Alright, those two tracks that I said were going up or down could be called afferent or efferent, or also ascending, meaning going up, just like an elevator goes up, or descending, like an elevator goes down. The peripheral nervous system is also called sensory or motor, and these two words essentially mean the same thing. Sensory and afferent, or motor and efferent, are really the same thing but just different words. The first one, sensory, is going to sense things happening around you or inside of you and bring that information up to your brain. And the motor or efferent is going to take the message that your brain needs to give to your body and carry it down your spinal cord out to your muscles, your skin, your organs, and everything else that's going on. If we see in a simple picture, we'll think of vision. Vision is a sense. This blue is representing the sensory sensory neurons. The green is representing an interneuron, and then the red is a motor or efferent neuron because it's telling your body to move your muscles to pick up that water glass you're seeing. Okay. Moving forward, we have two different types of peripheral nerves. We have 12 cranial nerves and 31 spinal nerves. Here's what those cranial nerves look like. If we're looking at the underside of the brain, they're all labeled 1 here, 2, 3, and they're paired all the way down to 12 near the brainstem. More importantly, we have 31 spinal nerves, and these are branching off of the spinal cord. And it looks just like this, and it goes both right and left side. We group these spinal nerves into categories: the cervical, meaning neck; thoracic, meaning the part of your spine that's connected to your rib cage; the lumbar or low back; and then we have the sacral nerves, and finally the coccygeal nerve at the very bottom. If we look at these more closely, here's a shoulder. This is called a plexus. When you have several nerves that are branching out from the spinal cord, and then they kind of get intermingled and tangled up, we call that a plexus of nerves. So here's a cervical plexus. We also have an example of a lumbar plexus blown up here, and a sacral plexus. So make sure you check those out. We won't have to memorize all of the nerves, but definitely check out what it looks like and maybe look at some of the bigger ones through the slides. That's all I have for you right now. If you have any questions on the fuller PowerPoint, feel free to let me know, and also keep your eyes peeled for another video coming up this week. Thanks.